Hello darlings, and welcome to the first in a series of historical tutorials to help you learn how to knit and crochet and maybe some other crafts too. Today we're going to be starting off with a very basic one from the Housewife here, which is from 1886. The article itself is knitted dishcloths. So let's get this in frame here. As you can see, it's a very small article, and what we're going to use it for is basically to learn how to knit. So all we're going to do is do a square of a certain size in garter stitch, and that's basically what our project is going to be. So I'll just read the article to you so you get a basic idea of what we're doing here. Knitted dishcloths. Those who are particular that their servants use proper cloths for proper purposes will find that knitted dishcloths are a great improvement on the unsightly grey and greasy things usually called by that name, and to be seen in a great many kitchens. To make one is but the work of an evening. Cast on with the coarsest unbleached knitting cotton about 60 stitches, using steel needles of the proper size to make tolerably firm knitting. Proceed to knit and garter stitch until your dishcloth is sufficiently large, then cast off. Either sew a loop of tape at one corner, or else crochet the loop before breaking off the knitting cotton. Servants usually take better care of these dishcloths than of the commoner kind, and having a loop to hang up by, they are less apt to become sour. So you don't actually need to remember all of that, but that's the pattern that we're going to be following to create our knitted dishcloth. Now, just a warning that I am left-handed, so if you want to learn how to knit, then you're going to have to follow a different tutorial, but you can still follow the steps if you wanted to make your own knitted dishcloth. The pattern calls for unbleached knitting cotton and steel needles of the proper size. So, I mean, Victorian tutorials are notorious for not giving actual yarn weights or needle sizes, so I'm just using what I have to hand, and if you want to follow exactly what I'm doing, then you can, or if you want to use whatever you have in your stash, you're free to as well. So, the needles here, I am using a US size 5, which is 3.75 millimeters, or in UK sizes, a size 9. The website that I use to buy my yarn actually has a dishcloth cotton category, so you might be able to find that for yourself. The one I'm using today is this Rico Creative Cotton DK, which is in natural. You can also use white. I couldn't find any unbleached wool myself, at least not for within my budget, so natural is as close as I'm going to get. So, let's start knitting. I recently discovered that I actually have been knitting wrong for years, so you're going to have to bear with me in terms of speed. So, to make a slip knot, what we're going to do is we're going to cross this around like that to get a loop like that, and then over the front here, we're going to push another loop through, and then that is your slip knot, which can go smaller or bigger, and that will go right on your needle. Let me do that again, just in case you couldn't see. So, doing a loop like that, another loop, go through, and pull to get a slip knot. And then we're going to learn how to cast on. So let's pull this slip knot tight on the needle, not too tight, you still want to be able to knit with it, but tight enough. Okay, so how many stitches do we need? 60. We're going to need a lot. To cast on, you're just going to need your thumb. What you're going to do, now, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to explain this because I've been doing this for so long it just kind of comes naturally. You're going to wrap it around your thumb this way, so it looks like this, crossed over, and then you're going to slip it on, so it looks like that. Let's do that again. We're going to go round, and on, around, and on. So you get this kind of backbone of the stitches here. So that's 4. I'll join you again when we've got 60. And 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Right, so we have all of the stitches on our needle now. what we are going to do is we are going to pick up our other needle. We're going to have our yarn on the left side here. And we are going to slip this needle right into the first stitch. So what you want, you've got that backbone bit here, you want to slip it into the back, like that. So you're within this stitch. We're going to grab the yarn, we're going to twist it around our fingers a little bit. I'm kind of doing a crochet hold, because I used, because of the weird way I knit before, I had it on my other hand. So I'm doing a crochet hold at the moment, but you can Google like in-depth ways of how to hold on to yarn for knitting. But what we're going to do is on this back one, we're going to wrap it around and then take it behind, front, and slip it off. So let's do that again. We're going into the back bump here. We're going to hold on to it with our right hand here. We're going to wrap it around the back, front, and then we're pulling it back and tipping it off. The first row is always the most difficult, so go really slowly. And if you are a beginner, like I said, use bigger needles. And again, maybe use just half the stitches so you can really keep track of how many stitches you have on your needle. Because it's so easy to accidentally add some more or lose them as you're knitting. And that's when you see the wibbly squares of beginner knitters. And what we want is a really nice even square to make our dishcloth from. So I'm going to hop back once I've got this first row finished, because I'm going to be really slow for this. Right, so as I come up to the last couple of stitches here, you'll notice that I'm keeping the two loops that I'm working with quite close to the ends of the needle. This is so you don't pull an unnecessary amount of yarn from this side and make like little loopy bits, like you can kind of see with this stitch here, that there's quite a big loop. I might redo this. But you want to keep it quite close to the edge, but not so close that they're going to fall off, because you don't want to lose any stitches accidentally. You also want to do this first row quite loose, just so the next row is easier to work in. Oh, I'm knitting so slowly. I'm knitting like a beginner again, which means it's a perfect time to do these tutorials. But it's very frustrating. I learned from my right-handed grandmother, so I kind of did a weird half mirroring thing. There we are. So let's just double check. We've still got 60 stitches. We haven't lost or gained any. It's a good idea to do this every couple of rows. Okay, yes, we've still got 60 stitches. So it actually makes quite a large dishcloth, really. If you are a beginner, half of this is enough, to be honest, so just cast on 30 stitches. But I'm going to continue with the 60, and I'm going to let you know, I want it to be square, really. The instructions don't say how big to make it, but I want it to be pretty much a perfect square. So I'll tell you how many stitches I did in order to get the square shape. It might be slightly different from you, depending on your tension, depending on your needle size and your yarn weight, but I'll give you a rough idea of how many stitches you need. And then we'll go to finishing off. Right, so as you can see, I've finished my dishcloth. It measures pretty much a square, so that's 24 by 24 here. And I've counted the rows, and it's roughly 110 rows if you're using the same weight of wool and the same size needles as I'm using. So we can finally begin casting off. Let's zoom in a little bit here. Casting off is pretty much the same as knitting. You're just stitching 2 stitches together as you go, so it's getting rid of a stitch every time. So what we're going to do is we're going to knit 2 stitches normally. And then once they are on your other needle, you're going to get rid of that 1 stitch and cast it over. So let's do that with the next one. Normal stitch. And then you're just going to grab this one below, if you can. There we are. And pull it over. Right, so I'm on the last stitch here. The instructions say either you can sew a loop of tape onto the end here, or if you have a crochet hook, you can use that to finish off this dishcloth. If you know how to crochet, this will be very easy. If you don't, it's just a simple chain stitch. So we grab the wool with our crochet hold, and then we loop it around the front here and pull the thread through. And we're going to do that 15 times. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then in order to finish that off, I'm just going to go back through the first hole that we finished on. I'm going to, actually let's get a bit closer. So we're in this hole at the moment. I'm going to pull the thread through this hole. So now we have 2 stitches. And then in order to do a slip knot, we're not going to thread over again. We're just going to pull this straight through. So pull out a bit of thread, grab your scissors, and cut it off. And then we're just going to pull this end through, and it should all be a nice neat little finish there. For the final step, I'm just going to weave in these ends so that you have less chance of unraveling. So just grab a large tapestry or darning needle, get the thread, and we're just going to follow the root of the knitting. So just weave it in. You don't have to go for too long, but just do it enough, and then pull it a little taut and cut it off. And then it's got a nice neat finish, and we're going to do this with the starting thread as well. And there you have it, a knitted dishcloth based on a pattern from 1886. This is actually quite unforgiving with how small the needles are and how big this square turned out to be. So if you're an absolute beginner, what I would recommend is using slightly larger needles and only doing 30. It would mean that mistakes are less obvious, and it'll also be accomplished more quickly, so you'll feel like you've done something. So that's it for this week. If you want to see more historical knitting or crochet tutorials, please let me know, and I'll see you next video.